This is a documented reconstruction of real historical events, built from verified records, historical evidence, and eyewitness accounts. Because history is more than dates, it is the story of people. To understand what happened, we must first understand how it unfolded. What follows is history, reconstructed. 37 seconds. That is the number history remembers. The time, so the legend goes, between the moment a lookout's bell rang 3 times over the North Atlantic and the moment the largest moving object ever built by human hands met a wall of ancient ice. The truth behind that number is stranger than the legend. This is the reconstruction of how those seconds came to be, and of everything they destroyed. Belfast, Ireland. For 3 years, the skyline of the Queen's Island shipyard was dominated by a steel skeleton longer than 4 city blocks. 15,000 men built her by hand, 3 million rivets, driven one by one. When Titanic slid into the river Lagan in May 1911, she was the largest vessel the world had ever seen, over 880 feet of steel, displacing more than 50,000 tons at full load. She was not merely large, she was a statement. A grand staircase crowned with wrought iron and glass, a swimming pool at sea, Turkish baths, a squash court, restaurants finer than most hotels in Europe. First-class parlor suites cost more than a skilled worker earned in a decade. Titanic was the Edwardian world in miniature, its wealth on the upper decks and its hopeful, crowded future traveling below. Her builders divided the hull into 16 watertight compartments. The ship could float with any 2 flooded, even with the first 4 gone. The trade journal The Shipbuilder called her practically unsinkable. The press and then the public quietly dropped the word practically. It was not a lie, exactly. It was something more dangerous, a margin of safety that became an article of faith. That faith had a shape, 20 lifeboats, capacity 1,178 people. On this crossing, Titanic carried more than 2,200. The arithmetic was known, printed, and perfectly legal. The Board of Trade's lifeboat regulations had been written for ships a quarter of her size, and no one had updated them. The boats were never meant to save everyone. They were meant to ferry passengers to a rescuer that was assumed to always be nearby. April the 10th, 1912, Southampton. At noon, 6 tugs eased the giant away from berth 44. Her wash was so powerful it snapped the mooring lines of the liner New York, dragging the smaller ship helplessly toward her, a collision missed by a few feet. Some passengers laughed. A few, it was later said, took it as an omen. Titanic steamed on, Cherbourg, then Queenstown, then the open Atlantic. On board was a cross-section of an age. John Jacob Astor, perhaps the richest man in America. Bruce Ismay, chairman of the White Star Line. Thomas Andrews, the ship's own designer, traveling to note her imperfections. And below them, more than 700 third-class passengers, Irish, Scandinavian, Lebanese, Armenian, most of whom had sold everything they owned for a ticket to a new life in America. On the bridge stood Captain Edward John Smith, 62 years old, 40 years at sea, the highest-paid shipmaster in the world. Passengers crossed the Atlantic specifically to sail with him. This voyage was widely reported to be his last before retirement. Smith had once told an interviewer he could not imagine any condition which would cause a ship to founder. Modern shipbuilding, he said, has gone beyond that. Sunday, April the 14th. Throughout the day, Titanic's wireless room received warning after warning from ships ahead. Ice, bergs, growlers, field ice. Directly across her track, at least 6 separate messages. Some reached the bridge. One of the most precise never did. The operators were exhausted working through a backlog of paid passenger telegrams to New York. The ice reports waited their turn. That evening, just a few hours steaming ahead, the freighter Californian ran into the same ice field and did what a cautious captain does. She stopped for the night. At 11:30, her only wireless operator, after being cut off mid-warning by Titanic's busy radio room, switched off his set and went to bed. The nearest ship to the coming disaster had just gone deaf. The night of April the 14th was, by every survivor's account, unnaturally beautiful. No moon, no wind. A sea so flat it looked like polished glass. And that stillness was the trap. No waves meant no white foam breaking at the foot of an iceberg. The air temperature fell to near freezing. In the crow's nest, the lookout's binoculars were missing, locked away. The key left ashore in Southampton after a last-minute reshuffle of officers. At 11:39 p.m., high in the freezing crow's nest, lookout Frederick Fleet saw a black mass resolve out of the darkness, dead ahead. He rang the bell 3 times and reached for the telephone to the bridge. "Iceberg right ahead." What happened in the moments that followed would be argued over for the next century, measured, disputed, and remembered by a single number: 37 seconds. On the bridge, First Officer William Murdoch had seconds to choose. He called hard a starboard, in the language of 1912, a turn to port, and rang the engine telegraphs. The great steering gear needed time the ship did not have. Titanic's bow began to swing left, slowly. Exactly how many seconds passed, no one would ever agree. What is certain is that it was almost enough. The ship did not crash into the ice. She brushed it. An underwater spur of the berg scraped along her starboard side for roughly 6 seconds, a touch so gentle that most passengers felt only a faint shudder, a rattle of glassware. Yet along nearly 300 feet of hull, seams of inch-thick steel plating flexed open. The total area open to the sea, engineers later calculated, was about 12 square feet, the size of a doorway. In Boiler Room 6, there was nothing gentle about it. The sea burst through the side like a battering ram of ice water. Stokers dove under the watertight door as the alarm rang and it came sliding down. The men who had spent the voyage feeding Titanic's furnaces were the first to know with total certainty that the sea was inside the unsinkable ship. Then came the strangest sound of the entire night. Silence. The engines, a heartbeat passengers had felt through the deck for 4 days, stopped. Card games paused. Stewards were asked polite questions and gave polite answers. Some passengers stepped out into the freezing air, found chunks of ice scattered on the well deck, and began, famously, to play with them. Captain Smith reached the bridge within a minute. "What have we struck?" Murdoch told him. Smith sent for the one man aboard who knew the ship better than her captain, Thomas Andrews, her designer. Together they went below. Down staircases, passengers were still climbing in dressing gowns into compartments where the water was already rising faster than the pumps could dream of fighting. In the mailroom, 5 postal clerks were dragging 200 sacks of registered mail up the sloping deck, trying to keep the Royal Mail dry as the water chased them from level to level. All 5 would keep working, and none of the 5 would survive. 10 minutes after the collision, the sea stood 14 feet above the keel in the forward compartments. Andrews did the arithmetic on which every life aboard now depended. Titanic could float with 4 of her forward compartments flooded. The ice had opened the first 5, perhaps 6. Water filling the bow would pull her down until it spilled over each bulkhead into the next compartment, one after another, like an ice cube tray tipped at one end. The mathematics had no mercy and no exit. The ship was going to sink. "How long have we?" Smith asked. "An hour and a half," Andrews answered. "Possibly 2. Not much longer." Smith, 40 years at sea, did not argue. At 5 minutes past midnight, he gave the order no captain of the age believed he would ever give on a ship like this: uncover the lifeboats, muster the crew. And he walked to the wireless cabin. At midnight, senior operator Jack Phillips began tapping the letters CQD, the distress call, followed by the ship's position. Later, half joking, his junior Harold Bride suggested the brand new signal: "Send SOS. It's the new call, and it may be your last chance to send it." Titanic's distress calls went out to a cold, mostly sleeping ocean. 58 miles to the southeast, the small Cunard liner Carpathia was carrying sleeping emigrants toward the Mediterranean. Her only wireless operator, Harold Cottam, caught Titanic's call almost by accident. He was still dressed, waiting for a reply on another matter. Within minutes, Captain Arthur Rostron had turned his ship around and ordered every ounce of steam to the engines. Top speed, 14 knots. She would need 4 hours. Titanic had, at best, 2. On the boat deck, the crew wrestled canvas covers off the lifeboats in air 4 degrees below freezing. The order came: women and children first. But the passengers being coaxed toward the rails could feel no list, see no damage, only a brilliantly lit, apparently solid ship, and beyond the rail, a 60-foot drop into blackness. The first boats would leave half empty. At 12:45, 2 things happened almost at once. Lifeboat 7 dropped toward the water carrying 28 people, in a boat built for 65. And from the starboard bridge wing, the first distress rocket screamed into the night sky and burst into white stars, visible for miles across the flat, indifferent sea. On a ship stopped in the ice just beyond the horizon, officers of the Californian saw it and wondered aloud what it might mean. Boat after boat went down the ship's side carrying empty seats. Boat 1 left with 12 people aboard, capacity 40. It was not malice, it was disbelief, cold, and a crew that had never once drilled for this together. Officers, unsure the davits would bear a full load, planned to fill the boats from doors lower in the hull. In the chaos, most of those doors were never opened. Far below the boat deck, 3rd class waited. There was no plan for them, no announcement in the 6 languages they spoke, no guides through a maze of corridors deliberately separated from the upper decks. Some stewards led small groups up. Many passengers found locked gates or simply never learned the way. Of the children in 1st class, 1 died that night. In 3rd class, 52. On deck, 8 musicians who had been hired to play dinner music assembled near the grand staircase and began to play. Ragtime, waltzes, anything calm. They played as the deck tilted beneath their feet, and they never stopped. Survivors would argue forever about the final song. What no one disputed is that all 8 played to the end, and all 8 died. At Boat 8, Ida Strauss, wife of the co-owner of Macy's department store, was offered a seat. She stepped back to her husband Isidore. "We have lived together for many years," witnesses heard her say. "Where you go, I go." They were last seen sitting together in deck chairs. In New York, 40,000 people would attend his memorial. John Jacob Astor helped his pregnant 19-year-old wife into Boat 4 and asked politely whether he might join her, given her condition. Second Officer Lightoller refused. Women and children only. Astor stepped back without argument, asked for the boat's number, and lit a cigarette. The richest man on the ship had just learned what his fortune could not buy. 10 miles away, perhaps less, perhaps a little more, the officers of the stopped Californian counted 8 white rockets rising over the strange ship on the horizon. They woke their captain twice to tell him. He asked whether the rockets were company signals, told them to keep watching, and went back to sleep. The ship's wireless set sat silent in a cabin 6 feet from a sleeping operator. It would have taken 1 minute to turn it on. By 1:30, the mathematics had become visible. The bow was buried to the forecastle. The propellers were beginning to rise. Inside, 35 engineers stayed at their posts in the flooding engine rooms, feeding the dynamos so that the lights and the wireless would live as long as the ship did. Not one of the 35 survived. The lights burned until almost the final minute. The last boats left in a different mood. Crowds now pressed the rails. Officers formed lines and warning shots were fired into the air. Bruce Ismay, chairman of the line, stepped into collapsible sea as it lowered, an act he would defend and be condemned for until the day he died. At 2:05, the final boat on the David's collapsible D went down. More than 1,500 people were still aboard. From the boats, hundreds of yards out, survivors watched a sight none of them could later describe without stopping. An ocean liner, every porthole still blazing, standing slowly on her head in a sea flat as a mirror. The stern rose until her 3 propellers hung dripping above the water, and then the lights went out, all at once, came back for a single flash and were gone. Then came a sound survivors compared to thunder, or to a building collapsing. Weighed down by her flooded bow, Titanic broke in 2 between the 3rd and 4th funnels. For 73 years, official inquiries insisted she had sunk intact, dismissing the survivors who swore otherwise. Not until the wreck was found in 1985, lying in 2 pieces half a mile apart, was it proven. The ones who were there had been right all along. The stern settled back, flooded, and rose again, almost vertical this time, and hung there, a black tower against the stars, for what survivors guessed was a full minute. At 20 minutes past 2 in the morning, April the 15th, 1912, it slid under. From the first sighting of the iceberg to this moment, 2 hours and 40 minutes, the sea closed over the unsinkable ship and the surface was still. And then the survivors learned that the silence was worse, because it was not silence. From the water where the ship had been rose the sound of more than 1,000 voices. In the half-empty boats, with room by the numbers for nearly 500 more, men and women sat frozen, arguing in whispers about going back. Only one boat returned. At 4 in the morning, a single green flare rose from the water, and the Carpathia, having raced through the same ice field that killed Titanic, with extra lookouts posted and every light burning, slowed among the bergs. At 4:10, the first lifeboat came alongside. Captain Rostron had prepared slings for the injured, hot soup, blankets, and doctors in every dining room. For the next 4 hours, the boats came in one by one out of the dawn. Just over 700 people were pulled from the boats. More than 1,500 were gone. As the sun rose, the survivors saw what the night had hidden. A field of icebergs stretching to the horizon in every direction, dozens of them white and silent. The one that mattered was indistinguishable from the rest. At 8:30, another ship arrived and began circling the empty water, the Californian. Her wireless operator had switched his set back on at dawn and learned, in a single minute, what the night's rockets had meant. She searched for hours. She found wreckage and deck chairs and silence. On land, the story arrived broken. Early headlines announced that Titanic was being towed to Halifax, all passengers safe. In New York, the White Star Line's vice president told reporters, "We place absolute confidence in the Titanic. We believe that the boat is unsinkable," hours after she had already gone down. By evening, he stood before the same reporters and said the company now feared the worst. On the night of April the 18th, the Carpathia steamed up the Hudson in a thunderstorm. 40,000 people stood in the rain at Pier 54. The ship first stopped at the White Star berth and lowered Titanic's empty lifeboats. 13 boats, everything that was left of the largest ship in the world. Then the survivors came down the gangway into the flash of the world's first modern media frenzy. 2 inquiries followed, one in Washington, one in London. Together they questioned everything. The speed, kept near 22 knots through a known ice field. The lifeboat regulations, decades out of date. The Californian, censured for watching 8 rockets and doing nothing. And yet, when the hearings ended, no company was ruined, and no officer went to prison. The verdict, in effect, was that the disaster had obeyed all the rules, and that the rules themselves had been the disaster. Then the rules changed. Lifeboats for every soul aboard, by law. Wireless rooms manned 24 hours a day, by law. And an international ice patrol to track every iceberg drifting toward the shipping lanes. A patrol that has operated from 1914 to this day. In the century since it began its watch, not one life has been lost to ice on the routes it guards. The dead of Titanic have been saving lives for over 100 years. The survivors carried the night in different ways. Bruce Ismay lived out his years in seclusion, the press never forgiving the seat he took. Frederick Fleet, the man who saw the iceberg first, struggled all his life. And Second Officer Charles Lightoller, the last man pulled from the water, sailed his own small yacht to Dunkirk in 1940 at age 66, and brought 127 soldiers home through the bombs. Some men, it seems, the sea trains for a second test. For 73 years, the ship herself kept her silence, 2.5 miles down. Then, on the 1st of September 1985, a camera sled towing through the dark found a boiler sitting alone on the seabed. The world saw her again. Bow upright, rust icicles hanging from her rails, a debris field of shoes and teacups between the 2 halves the inquiry said did not exist. Scientists now believe the wreck itself is dissolving, and that within decades the Titanic will finally, completely be gone. Which returns us at the end to a number. 37 seconds, a figure reconstructed after the fact, from a sister ship's turning trial, endlessly repeated and probably wrong. It survives because we need it to. A single human-sized span of time onto which an entire catastrophe can be pinned. But the true measure of that night was never the seconds before the ice. It was the years of certainty that came before them. Every unlaunched lifeboat, every unread warning, every rule written for a smaller world. The iceberg gave Titanic 37 seconds. Everything else she had been given long before. What remains is no longer the event itself, but its consequence. A record shaped by loss, silence, and time. The world moved forward, but it did not forget, and neither should we, because understanding what happened is how we prevent it from repeating.